talk about these domination systems for just a little bit. I said that the dragon brings up a couple of beasts. One is a secular political beast, and the other one is a religious ideological beast. And there are some folks in the last couple of decades that have referred to things called, that have begun to talk about domination systems, and I think it's a pretty good way to understand things. Rather than saying, is this a particular, remember we talked about 666, or who is this person, rather than talk about a particular individual, we need to, it's helpful sometimes to look at an entire system, of operation. So let's go back for just a minute or two to think about, remember the four horsemen of the apocalypse that were released when the first four seals were broken open by Jesus. So the four horsemen came riding out, and I called them domination, destruction, oppression, and death. Okay, now if you look at them in terms of individuals, that's one thing. But if you look at them in terms of the characteristics of an entire system of the way things operate, I think you get a better idea. Like, for instance, a system of operating like the Roman Empire here, for instance. How did the Roman Empire operate? There was a way in which the Roman Empire determined that they were going to dominate the world. They wanted to not just be friends with the world, they wanted to dominate, they wanted to rule the world. Everything had to be Roman. And so things came into Rome. Rome was the center of everything, was the center of the universe. And they had to dominate, and they had to make everything Roman. And even the culture and everything. And so the Romans always thought they were better than the Greeks. And in a sense, they were, there's a way in which Greek art, for instance, is a lot different from Roman art. Roman art is bigger and tackier and cheaper than Greek art. Okay, Greek art is wonderful and stylish and beautiful, and Roman art is not. It's bigger and gaudier and tackier than Greek art because Romans wanted to dominate. And the same thing is true of the world. I mean, Alexander, he was not even, I mean, he had the previous empire. He wanted to just go out and wipe out everything. But the Romans wanted to rule, and they intended to go and rule for 1,000 years. They did. Same thing with Nazi Germany. Okay, you may remember or not, but the idea of Hitler was that the Reich would last for 1,000 years, dominate. Okay, so there's one aspect. So domination, destruction. So in order to do that, we're going to destroy a lot of things that were previously there. We're going to destroy our enemies. We're not just going to, we're not going to negotiate with our enemies. We're going to destroy them. We're going to wipe them out. We're going to wipe them off the face of the earth. So there's a lot of destruction. We're going to destroy the old things, bring in our stuff. And that's what they did. Oppression. So slavery. Okay, it would not have been unusual for Romans to enslave people. All right. Now, a lot of people in the ancient world kept slaves, but the way Jews kept slaves was way different than the way Romans kept slaves. Okay? I mean, Jews had slaves, but there was always something in the Roman law about if you got sold. I mean, in the Jewish law, if you were sold into slavery every 7 years, there was an opportunity for all the slaves to be released. All right, the Jubilee. The Romans, much less so. And the Romans, the slaves were hard labor and all that other stuff. Jews, not so much. Okay? And so the Romans were very, very oppressive. And then death. The Romans, they mastered death in every form, as you see from crucifixion. They were a master of that. So this is these are some, but not all, characteristics of domination systems. Domination, destruction, oppression, and death. Not every domination system has that, but they just look sort of like that in many respects. So whether it's a political secular system or whether it's a religious ideological system. And remember, when the dragon comes, he calls up, and he's confined to the earth, he calls up two beasts. One from the sea, that's the secular political beast, and one from the land, that's the religious or ideological beast. And I'm going to use religious ideological so that you don't get the idea that it's just religious, because this is how I want to talk about it. So let's talk about these, and I've tried to get these lined up here. If you can't see them, they're on the handout that you can download. So on the one hand, the real obvious one in terms of the story of Jesus is Pontius Pilate on the one hand, who's the representative of the Roman domination system. All right, he's the representative of the secular domination system. On the other hand, there are priests and Pharisees and scribes who are the representatives of the religious ideological domination system at the time of Jesus. Jesus comes in, and he's on trial before both, right? The high priests and Pontius Pilate. And he's crucified and he's killed by both. They both blame. They're both vying for power in the Judea of that time, but they both are kind of working together to dominate the people and each other, to manipulate all their situation, to destroy each other and whoever's around. And death is not outside their toolbox. All right, even though the priests are saying, well, we don't have a law to send him to death, they're not above saying, let's take him over to Pontius Pilate. So the two kind of go hand in hand and work together when they need to. The Roman Empire, the political structure of the Roman Empire, we're going to see a lot more about that when we get to Revelation 18 and 19. John is going to go into great detail about what's wrong with the Roman Empire in his day, and he refers to that as Babylon, which for the Jewish mind is the place where they spent years in terrible exile. But it's the Roman Empire, and he's going to talk a lot about the political and secular nature of the Roman Empire. But the domination system that goes with that is the whole idea of imperialism, or you might say militarism, but imperialism. This notion of the Romans that we want to rule the world. We want to rule the world. Okay? And we are the kings of the world, and we are the best people in the world. And that was the deal. And so we spread this secular empire because we have this idea in our minds, this ideology, that the Romans are the best people in the world to rule the world. Okay? So that's that one. Nazi Germany, the political sphere in our day and age, or at least in the last century, in the last century, the political secular thing was Nazi Germany, but the ideology was fascism. Okay, that's what it was called. And so, the ideology there, fascism, Nazi Germany. Stalinist Russia, that led to the USSR, but particularly Stalinist Russia during World War II. Communism. All right, and I think if you're at all familiar with history and politics, you can see the distinction. Communism is a way of thought. It's a way of talking about things. Stalinist Russia under Stalin and then the USSR is a way of organizing the thing politically. All right, and the abuses that the people suffered under Stalin. We've read about Solzhenitsyn and the gulags and all that other stuff, all the political things that they used to oppress and manipulate. Talk about domination, destruction, oppression, and death. Just read the stories about the gulags under Stalinist Russia, okay, and under communist USSR. Okay, so you've got a political domination system that's matched with the ideology of communism that tells you it's ideologically okay to do this. All right. Now, when you talk this way, then you get communist Eastern Europe. Okay. Now, in communist Eastern Europe, you have these various countries, and here's how that kind of worked out. You not only had the political system that was moved by the communist ideology, but you had churches there that then began to suffer. And here's what happened, at least this is how it got reflected in the United States. Let me tell you this little story. You'd have communist countries like, say, Yugoslavia, an extremely repressive communist country. So you have Yugoslavia, but in Yugoslavia there's an Orthodox church, okay, the Serbian Orthodox Church in Yugoslavia. And some Serbs migrated to the United States. And then they would set up Serbian Orthodox congregations in the United States. There's one in Parma, for instance, St. Sava Serbian Orthodox Church. So then they set up a congregation in the United States, and what are they going to do? Well, like most Orthodox churches and Catholic churches, a congregation can't be a freestanding congregation. You have to be under the authority of a bishop. So what are you going to do? These churches get to the United States, and they're setting up a congregation, or these immigrants get to the United States, they set up a congregation, then they look back to Yugoslavia and they say, the bishop back in Serbia, in communist Yugoslavia, is there, and we left Yugoslavia so that we don't have to be under the control of the communists, but he pretty much is under the control of the communists, because he's still there, and he's doing some things that were pretty much still under the control of communists. So what are we going to do? So they decide that they're going to set up their own archdiocese in the United States. So there's a Serbian Orthodox Archdiocese of the United States with its own archbishop. But in the meantime, there are other Serbian Orthodox people that have come over, set up churches, and they're saying, no, we can't do that because there's this notion that we have called apostolic succession, which means we have to be faithful to the bishop that was ordained by the one who was ordained by the one who was ordained by the one who was ordained by Peter. Okay, and that bishop is the one in Yugoslavia. So now you have two Serbian Orthodox denominations in the United States, one of which says we have to be faithful to the bishop who's in Yugoslavia. Another one says we don't want to be faithful to that communist puppet because he's a puppet of the communists, and we came to the United States to get away from that guy, from those guys. And sometimes they fight. They come to blows, or they fight about that. Sometimes congregations divided, and there's big fights. And if you lived in Parma in the 70s, in the 1970s, this is what was going on in that congregation up there. It was not a pretty sight. It's much better now that communism is, kind of resolved in some ways in those areas. But under communism, what you had was the political system of the communist countries, and then you had the Orthodox churches living under communism, and the suspicion of the people that the leaders of those Orthodox churches were nothing more than puppets of the communists. So how's the church supposed to survive? In some places, so that's the communist extreme. There are other places in which, like for instance, even in Western Germany, where you had a state church, where there were some churches that were saying, some believers were saying, we're suspicious even of the state church. The state church in Western Germany, they may be puppets of the state church, so they set up independent churches. So for instance, in Western Germany, which was not under the communists, you have a state church, and then you have a state Lutheran church, but you have an independent Lutheran church. And for decades, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has been in altar and pulpit fellowship with the independent Evangelical Lutheran Church of Germany, but not with the state Lutheran Church of Germany. Okay, so there's, for some of those reasons. So it gets kind of tricky that way. You have to be, and so believers have said you have to be careful of what the land beast is going to do. Okay, because he's an ideological, religious beast who's got a political counterpart, and sometimes they work together against the state church. We're learning these days now that as far as Russia is concerned, the Russian government, the Russian government is cracking down on religious organizations because they don't like this multiplicity of religious organizations. They're trying to get rid of a lot of them and saying, no, we only want traditional churches in Russia. And they're coming back, they're paring it down. So right now, the approved groups are not only the Russian Orthodox and Catholic, but also mainline Protestants like Presbyterians and Lutherans, so for some reason or other. So that's not a bad thing. But the Lutherans in Russia are independent Lutheran churches. They're not state churches. All right, let's go on a couple more things. In the United States, we have a couple of these things too. In the United States, I've put here westward expansion, the whole drive in the 1800s to settle the West. Get people out in the American West, get them out there, let's expand the country, let's get new states, let's get new territories, let's open new territories, let's explore the West, let's do all that other stuff. The ideology that was behind, there was some of that, there's all that territory out there, let's do that. There was an ideology behind that. If you remember from your social studies in 7th grade, it was called Manifest Destiny, okay? It wasn't only, there's a lot of land out there for the, to be had and you can make a living out there as farmers. It is our God-given destiny to take that land and use it as white people, okay? And if there were red Indians out there occupying that land, it is our God-given destiny as white people to have that land, and that means, too bad, so sad for the red Indians. And so if that means they end up on reservations, that's fine. If that means we end up killing them in battles, that's also fine. But it's ours for the taking. That's our God-given right. That's what Manifest Destiny was all about. And you remember reading about that in 7th grade social studies, although nobody ever said it that way, but that's what it was. That was the ideology that was behind the whole idea of let's open new states. Kansas, Utah, Wyoming, all those guys, okay? And that's the political part. Now in these days, we have other political and religious things going on also in this century. In these days, the political beast looks like a whole variety of things, okay? It looks like ISIS, it looks like neo-Nazis, but also looks like Zionism among the Jews. It looks like neo-Nazis and white supremacists among white people. It looks like black nationalists among black people. It looks all kinds of ways, okay? The religious or the ideological beast, the land beast, looks like radical religious fundamentalism, okay? And by radical religious fundamentalism, what I mean by that is, there is a notion in all of these. There is a notion in all of these that we don't like the way things are going. We need to go back to the way things were, and we're going to circle the wagons and fight like hell to preserve the life we know we liked. Whatever that was, okay, that's, and God is on our side. So whatever the definition of the past, however we get to define the past, however we get to define our life, however we get to define God, that's kind of radical religious fundamentalism. Whether it's ISIS, whether it's Zionism among the Jews, whether it's white or black nationalism or supremacism, doesn't matter. The whole point is to say, we don't like the way the world is going. We want to go back to the way we think it should have been all along, and God help anybody that gets in our path. That's this whole deal here, radical religious fundamentalism. Okay, I haven't put up here under the sea beast for political systems. I haven't put up here two other domination systems that I think are ideological because I don't think they have a political counterpart. One is the economic system, and the other one's a technological system. I think there are ways in which I think they kind of flowed into some of these others, but I think there's ways in which there's an economic domination. So I think capitalism is an economic domination system. Like there's a way in which the system that we have, the economic system that we have, which is capitalism, just dominates everything. And you know, very simply said, the rich just get a whole lot richer and the poor just get a whole lot poorer, and there just continues to be a divide between the rich and the poor, and the very rich just get very much richer. And there's no solution to that under the capitalist system. It's just the way it is. And the poor just get very much poorer under the capitalist system, and there's no solution for that. The other type of domination system that's there is the technological or technical system. And the way that works is once, and it's very subtle, but once technology gets a hold of things, you can't live without it. And everything in your mind, you know, every time you turn around, you're looking at some technology to help. Or you're saying, look at how much better it is with technology. Look at how much better this or that is with technology. Even this, to a certain extent, is a little bit better with that. I could have just printed this all out, you know, wrote it all out and given you a handout and said, now you read it to yourselves and you know, take turns reading it around the table. But somebody said, oh no, it's much better if you do a video. Well, all right, so I have a video. And then we have to figure out what's the technology to disperse the video to you and so forth. And you know, it just gets more and more complex because we can't live without it. Okay? And the technological domination system, everything just multiplies and dominates until there's nothing you can do about it. We just live with it. And it can get scary if it's in the wrong hands. That's why, you know, that's why this can be a domination system, even though I don't know that there's a political counterpart to either one of those, to either capitalism or technology. So there you go. That's the explanation of, or that's my explanation of the land beast and the sea beast. That's why I say, I don't want to say that either that the sea beast is definitely Hitler, because I think there's a lot of ways we could say, here are other things. I think there's a lot of ways we need to look at these things. And a lot of ways we can say, these are ways in which the devil is influencing our culture. These are ways in which the devil is influencing our society. In fact, last year, Cardinal Robert Sarah, who's a Roman Catholic cardinal and archbishop from Africa, had a speech. It was very controversial. He had a speech. He said the African church is being pressured by two apocalyptic beasts. One was ISIS, and the other one was the LGBT gender ideology. Okay? One from either side. The African churches are being pressured by ISIS, or threatened by ISIS on the one side, the political beast, and the ideological beast is the LGBT gender ideology on the other side. He made this statement, and he said, you know, that Africa is just being pressured by this, and the Western churches were just like in uproar because of this. No, you can't say that. He said, no, that's absolutely what's going on. And we have to be aware of these things. Okay, so that's Revelation 12 and Revelation 13. God bless you. Have a good week. And we'll pick it up at Revelation 14. Thanks.